The year was 2847 when the Galactic Council made their decision. 12 alien species sat around the great circular table in the Hall of Stars, and they voted unanimously to remove humanity from their ranks. Ambassador stood alone in the center of the chamber as the verdict was announced. Her face showed no emotion, but her hands were clenched tight behind her back. High Counselor, a tall being with silver scales and 4 eyes, read the charges against humanity. They were called aggressive. They were called dangerous. They spread too fast across the stars. They asked too many questions. They challenged traditions that had stood for 10,000 years. They refused to accept their place in the natural order of things. The representative spoke with disgust in his voice. He said that humans were like a disease that spread wherever they went. The delegate agreed and added that humanity's technology grew too quickly. In just 300 years, they had developed weapons that took other species thousands of years to create. The ambassador called them unpredictable and said the council could never trust a species that valued individual thinking over collective harmony. Was allowed to speak in defense of her people. She stood tall and told them that humanity had done nothing wrong. They had helped end 3 wars. They had shared medical technology freely. They had asked only for equal treatment and respect, but her words fell on deaf ears. The council had already made up their minds. The exile order was simple and cruel. Humanity had 1 year to withdraw from all council space. They could take only what they could carry. All trade agreements were canceled. All diplomatic ties were severed. Any human ship found in council territory after the deadline would be destroyed without warning. Returned to Earth with the news. The governments of humanity met in emergency session. There was anger and there was fear. Some wanted to fight. Some wanted to beg for forgiveness. But in the end, humanity chose a third path. They would leave peacefully. They would go into the uncharted regions of the galaxy where no council species had ever traveled, and they would build something new. The Great Migration began. Billions of humans packed onto colony ships. They took their machines, their knowledge, their art, and their dreams. They left behind worlds they had called home for generations. Children were born on ships that traveled through the darkness between stars. Old people died without ever seeing their new home. The council watched them go with satisfaction. The celebrated with feasts. The removed all mention of humanity from their historical records. Their translation devices to forget human languages. Within 5 years, it was as if humanity had never existed. But while the council species returned to their comfortable routines, humanity was busy in the wild regions of space. They found planets that the council had declared uninhabitable and made them bloom with life. They built stations in asteroid fields that were considered too dangerous to navigate. They developed new technologies out of necessity and desperation. The first generation of exile was hard. Many colonies failed. Many people died. But humans had always been survivors. They adapted and evolved. They created new forms of government that worked better than anything they had tried before. They invented faster ships, stronger shields, and more efficient power sources. They did not waste time on petty conflicts among themselves. They had learned from being cast out that unity was their greatest strength. 50 years passed in exile. Human civilization had not just survived but had grown stronger than ever before. Their population had tripled. Their territory now covered a region of space larger than what they had owned before the exile. Their technology had advanced by centuries in just decades. And then the swarm came. The first reports arrived at the Galactic Council from the outer territories of space. Ships were disappearing without trace. Colonies were going silent. Investigation teams found only death and destruction. The attackers were unlike anything in council records. They were a machine intelligence from beyond the galaxy, and they consumed everything in their path. Planets, ships, space stations, and living beings were all broken down and converted into more of the swarm. The council responded with their combined military forces. They had thousands of warships and millions of soldiers. They had defended their territories for 10,000 years against every threat. They were confident in their power. The Battle of Prime lasted only 6 hours. The Council fleet was destroyed completely. Not a single ship escaped. The swarm continued its advance without pause. It did not negotiate. It did not accept surrender. It simply consumed. Panic spread across Council space. They abandoned their outer colonies. They pulled back to their home systems. They tried to create biological weapons but failed. Species that had lived in peace for thousands of years began fighting each other for resources and safe passage. High Counselor called an emergency meeting. The mood in the Hall of Stars was very different from 50 years ago. There was no arrogance now. There was only fear. The 12 species argued and blamed each other. They had no plan. They had no hope. It was a young scientist who spoke the words that no one wanted to hear. She reminded the council about the humans. She told them that her research showed humanity had developed weapon technologies far beyond anything the council possessed. Their ships were faster. Their shields were stronger. They might be the only species capable of fighting the swarm. The chamber fell silent. The very idea of asking humanity for help was humiliating. These were the beings they had called dangerous and aggressive. These were the beings they had thrown away like garbage. How could they possibly go to them now and beg for assistance? But as reports of more destroyed worlds came in, pride became a luxury they could no longer afford. The council voted to send a delegation to find humanity and request their return. Ambassador himself led the mission. He traveled for weeks through uncharted space until he reached the border of human territory. What he found there made him freeze with shock. A massive station hung in space, surrounded by hundreds of warships. These vessels were sleek and powerful, nothing like the primitive ships humanity had possessed 50 years ago. Shuttle was allowed to dock. Human guards escorted him through corridors filled with technology he did not recognize. Finally, he was brought to a meeting room where a human woman waited. She introduced herself as Admiral, commander of the Human Defense Force. Began to speak, but the Admiral raised her hand to stop him. She told him that humanity already knew about the swarm. They had been tracking its advance for months. They knew why he was here. The old diplomat swallowed his pride and made his request. He asked humanity to return to Council space and help defend against the swarm. He promised that all charges against humanity would be dropped. He offered them their old territories back plus additional systems as compensation. Admiral listened without expression. When finished, she asked him one simple question. She asked why humanity should help the species that had abandoned them. Had no good answer. He talked about shared history and common cause. He mentioned the innocent lives at stake. He even tried to appeal to human compassion, but the Admiral only shook her head. She told him that humanity had shown compassion before and received exile in return. She said that human children had died in the migration because the Council decided humans were too dangerous to live among them. She asked what had changed. Were humans suddenly less dangerous, or did the Council simply need their danger pointed at someone else? The diplomat had nothing to say. He realized how foolish they had been. They had thrown away the one species that might have been able to stand against this threat, not because humans were evil, but because humans were different, because humans challenged them, because humans made them uncomfortable. Admiral let him sit in silence for a long moment. Then she spoke again in a softer voice. She told him that humanity would help, not because the Council deserved it, not because they had forgiven what was done to them, but because there were billions of innocent people who would die if they did nothing. Because humans remembered what it felt like to be helpless and alone in the dark, because that was who humans chose to be. But she made it clear that things would be different now. Humanity would not return as a junior member begging for acceptance. They would come as equals, or they would not come at all. The Council would accept human representatives in positions of real power. Human laws and customs would be respected, and never again would any species face exile simply for being different. Agreed to everything. He had no choice. He returned to the council and delivered humanity's terms. Some species protested, but most understood the reality of their situation. Within weeks, the human fleet arrived at the front lines. The council species watched in awe as human vessels engaged the swarm. Their weapons tore through enemy formations. Their tactics were unpredictable and creative. Their soldiers fought with a ferocity that terrified allies and enemies alike. The war lasted 3 years. It was brutal and costly. Many worlds were lost before the tide turned. But in the end, humanity led the combined forces to victory. The swarm was pushed back beyond the galactic rim, and the threat was ended. In the aftermath, the galaxy was rebuilt under new principles. Humanity took its place among the great powers, not above others but beside them. The old prejudices did not disappear overnight, but they began to fade. Young aliens grew up learning human languages and human history. Mixed communities formed on border worlds. Ambassador, now elderly but still sharp, was invited back to the Hall of Stars. She stood in the same place where she had received the exile verdict 60 years ago. This time, the council gave her an apology and a medal of honor. She accepted both with grace, but in her speech, she reminded them that the true lesson was not about human strength. It was about the cost of fear and prejudice. The council had almost destroyed themselves not because of any external enemy, but because they could not accept a species that was different from them. Humanity had proven something that day. They proved that strength was not just about weapons and ships. True strength was the ability to show mercy to those who had shown none. True strength was building bridges after walls had been raised against you. True strength was choosing to be better than the worst thing done to you. The stars now belonged to all species equally. The exile was over, but the memory of it remained as a warning for future generations. Fear of the different had nearly cost them everything. Only by embracing diversity had they survived. And somewhere in the restored records of a simple entry was added to their historical files. It read that humanity was a species of great contradiction. They were capable of terrible violence and boundless compassion. They were unpredictable and stubborn. They forgave even when forgiveness was not deserved, and the galaxy was better for having them in it.